In this tutorial video, I want to take you through the process that I use to block in my subject directly on the canvas that I'm going to paint it on. Part of what I think is really interesting about working this way is that it harnesses that sense of momentum and excitement and doesn't allow it to dissipate while going through the various stages of production that we can experience in a more kind of drawn out process. So really, what we're removing here is the preparatory drawing phase that a lot of times we'll go through in projects where we really want to ensure an outcome. So in a way, we take a little bit more risk, but what we're paying for with that risk is to kind of embrace that sense of excitement and momentum that we have when we really just want to dive into a project and not be impeded by a lot of kind of stops and starts along the way to finishing. As a professional artist nowadays, and even when I was a student, I understood very well the role that momentum played in my ability to kind of execute the ideas that I was trying to work with on a canvas. So often the difference between a successful conclusion and an abandoned project was really only the amount of excitement I was able to conjure up at the beginning of my painting day. So what I'm going to describe through the steps of this process is how each stage feeds into the next stage and almost suggests to you the next set of accomplishments that you need to make to get to a finished painting. The materials that I've chosen for this are particular to this process as well. The linen that I'm painting on is actually very smooth. It's a little bit unusual for me that I use an acrylic ground, but that's what I've chosen for this project. I've also put an imprimatura over that acrylic ground so as to kind of remove the stark whiteness of the linen kind of staring back at me. The value of that imprimatura, if 1 is lightest and 10 is darkest, is maybe around a 2 or a 3 in value. So not incredibly dark, really quite light actually. Also, the color that I've chosen for that imprimatura is really rather a cool one. I thought eventually that that temperature would harmonize well with the flesh tones that I would eventually paint on it. The first stage that we're going to go through in this is actually the block-in, which we're going to be doing in graphite. I've chosen this because it's a very comfortable medium for me. It's very easy to control. And also, unlike charcoal, it kind of sticks to the surface a little bit better. And so when I'm beginning the oil painting, it doesn't pull up so easily into the paint film. So beginning the block-in on a canvas really is not going to be too much unlike what you would do on a piece of paper, except for a couple key factors. The first of which being the drawing that I'm going to make on the canvas really is not so important to maintain a great visual impression, more so it is about a structural sensibility and how that structure and those planes that I'm going to describe translate into painting decisions. I will of course be blocking in the basic shadow and light phenomenon that we associate with all kinds of impressionistic drawing, because eventually that's very conducive to the way I'll organize my painting as well. So starting out, we're going to be doing a lot of cross-referencing along horizontal and vertical axes, making sure that the brow ridge and the nostrils and the outside corners of the mouth all tilt along the same angle and also correlate well to the vertical center line of the head, helping to indicate the way that the head is turned away from us so much. Our goal right now for this stage of the project is to have a completely realized portrait, which is to say all of the features are there and described, while also not proceeding too much beyond that basic first stage of the drawing process. Your assignment at home in your studios right now is to prepare your surface. So take your linen, which is either stretched over stretcher bars or adhered to a panel, and make sure that it's going to be smooth enough for you to draw on with a pencil. After you've made sure that you've chosen the right surface to paint on, you're going to apply an imprimatura. This can be done by taking an old rag and a little bit of linseed oil and rubbing a thin mixture of paint over the surface. After that, of course, it has to take a few days to dry completely, so there's a pretty long preparation that we have to go to before we even start painting. So we have to be patient and careful in our preparation before we really start this project. After you've made sure that your materials are prepared, you're going to choose a source image from the model pack that I provided, and then we're ready to get started. So I want to revisit here and look again at that template of the head that I was talking about, right? So we are kind of trying to please two different sources here, which is to say that I want to create a kind of linear block-in, but also acknowledge the fact that there is some sense of value that would really kind of complete that concept. The value in this moment really I've kind of kept out just because I find that to whatever extent I do use it, it does kind of lock me into a drawing a little bit more. I said at the beginning of this project that I'm trying not to kind of fall in love with the shapes and the angles that I've made, and that as soon as I have a sense of form, I tend to start to get a little bit more committed to what I've made. This is what I'm keeping in mind when I kind of leave this value out overtly. The purpose or the idea for this head template really is that I'm trying to make a place for the features to be placed. So an eye then doesn't become a thing that we just draw on its own. We want it to be drawn in a place that is correctly related to the location of all of the other features. Now, as you can imagine, if we have a lot of different features and proportions to kind of deal with, and we want to take a look at them holistically, it's important to have kind of placeholders. That's what these plane shifts and these generic shapes are. They're just placeholders where I will later put the nose and the mouth and the eyes and the ear and so on. And the only concession really that I've made to a sense of volume is to indicate these planes with lines. We're trying to make almost a kind of wire frame here. Like I said, that will give us a sense of dimensionality without maybe becoming too concrete or too real. With that in mind, my assignment for you in this moment is to make sure that you do not commit to anything that you've put on the page here. The expected level of inaccuracy at the moment could be up to 1 centimeter or half a centimeter in terms of distances that you're going to be willing to kind of move features around within. We're working from the broad to the specific, and that means checking and rechecking our broad arrangements. If we become too excited or too invested in the features that we've made, we're far less likely to have as dogged an approach to this assessment and reassessment as we will need to have in order to be successful in this phase of the project. So we're coming now to a very important moment in this project. We're going to be transitioning into painting the underpainting. In order to do that, I'm going to use raw umber and flake white, and I have a nice synthetic round brush, and I'm using almost no medium whatsoever to do this. There's no turpentine and only just a little bit of linseed oil to help the kind of paint flow across the surface. Something I have done in between finishing the drawing phase and beginning the painting phase is to have sprayed a couple of spritzes of something called Spectrafix onto the surface of my canvas. This is a milk enzyme-based fixative, and the fact that I haven't used very much of it means that I haven't really sealed the surface. I've just tried to take the least bound aspects of graphite and fix them to the surface a little bit more carefully. This is a step that you can either omit or use yourself. Either way, the outcome is not going to be dramatically different. I should mention, though, that in this moment we want to be really quite certain of what our drawing is going to be. I spoke earlier about the expectation of inaccuracy in a given stage. At this moment of the project, our expectation of inaccuracy should really be rather small, down to even a couple of millimeters of distance in between what it is and what it should be eventually. Now, while I understand, of course, that there's no way to totally know for certain that we are in a place that is 100% accurate or even 90% accurate, it's just a benchmark that I like to set for myself so that I understand the demands of this phase of the project. So at the moment, some things are really quite committed to, though not necessarily set in stone. I do have to remember, of course, that this is still just a part of the plan, right? This is just one moment in the painting, and I shouldn't get too far ahead of myself in terms of describing edges and shapes and transitions. What I'm going to be doing really is just kind of outlining what I've already made in graphite, not really so much elaborating on it, except in a couple of cases where I might soften an edge that is incredibly soft. Let's say, for instance, the shadow edge at the bottom right side of the jawline, which is turning so softly underneath into the cast shadow on the neck. I'm unlikely there to make as sharp a line as I would make, say, along the left-hand side or the left-hand contour of the forehead. But this will really just be a kind of binary edge choice, which is to say it's either hard or it's a little bit softer, and I'm not going to make much nuance in between those at the moment. Your assignment at your studios at home is to set up your palette much in the way that you've seen me do it here, putting your raw umber and your flake or titanium white at the top edges of the palette and giving yourself a little bit of room to kind of mix the paint on the palette underneath. Make sure that you have a couple of brushes. I'm really just going to use my synthetic round here, but you can use a variety of different brushes for this purpose. Some people prefer to draw with the edge of a flat brush or a bright. Some of you may even prefer to use filberts. I would just say that you want something that can mimic your stick of charcoal or your graphite pencil. A great pitfall of this moment of the painting, and I want to warn you about it here while you're getting to work, is to not engage with enough restraint in this moment. We have to think about the timeline. Really, this is just still the beginning of the project, and we have a series of stages to come afterwards in which we're going to address things like subtlety of modeling and roundness of form and brightness of impression. These are things that we're going to engage with at a later stage, and we should hold ourselves back in this moment from doing that. Not because it couldn't be fun to do or it couldn't be engaging to do, but that it would possibly be impractical. With that in mind, I'm someone who believes in a kind of multiplistic universe in which many different paths can lead eventually to the same place. If there are things that you would like to do in this stage to improvise, certainly that's okay. What I tend to prescribe is the one that is least likely to lead you to compromising the progress that you're going to go through in the project at an early stage. So we're coming to the end of this phase of the project, and really the painting section, as you can see, doesn't take all that long. Because I've established so clearly in my drawing the design that I wanted to make in the initial stages of painting, I really just go through and solidify or make more concrete the decisions that I made already in a slightly more flexible material. Remember, what we have in this moment is kind of the armature on which we're going to make the painting. If you're not familiar with what an armature is, it's a sculpture term in which you make a kind of wireframe inside of the human body that you're going to be sculpting on top of that. Something that just holds the clay up while you're making all the fine modeling, refinement, and expression on top of it. Painting, of course, has no need for a physical armature, but what we have here is a conceptual armature. That wireframe being expressed in this moment in oil paint in a slightly more subtle way than it was when we initially blocked it in on this canvas. The line and edge quality goes here from hard to soft, but not really in any extreme way. As I said at the start of this phase of the project, it's somewhat of a binary decision. It's either hard or it's somewhat soft, and not much in between. Value-wise, I've made almost no statements. I'm going to, at the very end of this, scumble in just a little bit of umber onto the side plane of the head to differentiate it from the front plane of the head so that I can get some sense of form emanating from it. I do think that though this isn't something that will show up in the final phase of the painting, the earlier that you can start to engage with a simplified sense of form in paint, the more that the reality of the head can emerge and help you to see the kind of similarities or differences that you're dealing with. So at the close of this operation here, we're going to be ready to paint in color. And while this is definitely a preparatory moment, I do want to mention also that I feel it's important and advisable to find a way actually to kind of fall in love with these preparatory phases. I do think that in fact underpaintings themselves can be incredibly beautiful. And while I will say over and over and over that we shouldn't commit to these indications and to really anything that we're putting on the canvas in this moment, at least not in a 100% way, I think that we should also appreciate the aesthetic experience that we're having indicating the painting in this way.